Hello there, welcome to another set of shows. This week I've got things like Dragon Slayer to look at. I've got Fruity's Honour. I've got two more Sergio Lima films. I'm going to start off with Naked Lunch, the David Cronenberg film adaptation of the William Burroughs novel, which here we have here. And this is a terrific box set by Arrow. It's released today. I pre-ordered it, so I managed to get it. So you get a disc, you get a booklet, and you get a poster. I'm not going to do the whole unboxing thing. You can see it on the website or what's in it. I'm really more interested in the film rather than showing what's in the box. It's like it doesn't really matter. The actual extras, the best extras are actually in disc, where you get like an hour long documentary making Naked Lunch on Naked Making Lunch, was an old South Bank show, which they've remastered and put on here. There's an hour-long interview with Peter Weller, the star of the film. You've got another hour-long interview with Tony Raines talking about William Burroughs and David Cronenberg. He's all sniffing about Cronenberg for some reason, don't know why. And you've got some other documentaries that I've yet to watch, but there's quite a few interviews with people like Howard Shore, Jeremy Thomas, producer, Peter Shazitsky, the cinematographer, and Chris Wallace, who did the special effects. Talking about the process of doing all of these different aspects of the film and what it all came together. You've also got Cronenberg commentary from an older disc, and you've got a new commentary as well. So it's a hell of a lot of stuff in this new box set. So it's definitely worth getting, and the picture quality is gorgeous. It really is gorgeous when you watch it on the screen. I watched it on a big screen that's I've got on the projector, and it looks great. And it's the first time for years I've seen it on a bigger screen, because I saw it in the release in Edinburgh when it was released. I was living in Edinburgh at the time, and then I saw it again in a Film Society screening on the big screen. But since then, I've just seen it on video and on, DVD. But it's never looked as good since the cinema. So it's definitely, if you're going to get a film, it's definitely getting 4K. The 4K disc looks beautiful. It's got great stuff throughout. It's just wonderful. So that's why I recommend it to watch the most. Now, Cronenberg was always a big fan of Burroughs. But William Burroughs himself was a writer who actually had money. His family had money, but he was the outcast of the family. So he was gay, he was a drug addict, he lived underground life of, taking lots of drugs, hanging out with literary people who were also ne'er-do-wells, getting into trouble. And he's the writer who shot his own wife is a big thing. That's a big thing about Burroughs. He shot his own wife. Now, it was an accidental situation, but it happened due to a William Taylor routine, which comes into the film. After that, Burroughs went on the run, ended up in Tangiers, where he started to write a lot of stuff, a lot of routines that eventually all came together to form Naked Lunch. He tried one or two other traditional novels before that with Junkie and Queer, but they were not novels that actually could easily be sold. And he didn't want his family to know about all the stuff he was up to, so he tried keeping. So he had a pseudonym called William Lee, which is the name of the person that Peter Weller plays in the film, which is an indication that this is not William Burroughs. This is almost like it's always in a film scene. This is a view of William Burroughs, but using the name William Lee. So it's not William Burroughs. This is a fictional thing. It's a one step removed from William Burroughs. So it is a fiction. It is like a reflection of what happened, but it's not the real thing. And the film itself is about the process of writing Naked Lunch, and about all what I've just talked about, which is he shot his wife, he went on the run, and he ended up in Tangiers. In this more fictional version, even though he shot his wife in Mexico, so he managed to get to US, and there was no warrant for him in the US. Here he shoots his wife in New York, and then he goes into Interzone around Tangiers, which is this fantasy world that has a lot of reflection of the real world, but it could all be in his head, in his drug-fueled head. And the film never makes it clear whether he actually ever did leave New York or if he would just get high and fantasize all these things and started writing them all down. And the whole point is there are dangerous people everywhere. No matter where you go in the world, it's dangerous. And there's all kinds of danger, and it's how do you process the world? And with William Lee, it's about how he processes the world through writing. Because he killed his wife. Before he killed his wife, he had drug problems, trying to go straight, but he's still hanging around with his literary friends who are based in Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, but are given different names. Just like William Lee and not William Burroughs, they've got fictional names, but you know who they're based on. There's Tom Frost, which is and Joan Frost, which are based on Paul Bowles and Jane Bowles from Tangier, because William Burroughs knew them. But they fictionalized as well, because Burroughs obviously was gay, so he never had anything with Jane Bowles. So there's a lot of complications that are fictionalized. Again, that's why it's called William Lee rather than William Burroughs. Because William Burroughs, by the time after the death of his wife, he started to confront his homosexuality. He was a much more openly gay person, much more than the character in this film is. So I've read quite a few William Burroughs books. I've read his early, more traditional novels, The Junkie and Queer. I've read Naked Lunch, of course. I've read some of the sequels, the cut-up stuff. So I've read quite a few of his books. I've read the biography, Literary Outlaw, as well. I covered his the Criterion release of Burroughs as well. So I like the beats, I like all that stuff. They can be a bit pretentious, but Burroughs, I think, was the most interesting one because he was the most political, and he was the one who looked at humanity as something that's difficult to deal with and has its problems and its dangers. And a lot of what Burroughs was about was the things that were floating in your head that you weren't aware of that would do you danger. And a lot of things on the outside that of yourself that could also do you danger because it's a dangerous world, it's a dark world, and it's a world with lots of people who are not who they say they are. And he talks a lot about addiction. Addiction can be to anything. Now, he had addiction to drugs, but I just allowed him to see the metaphor of you can be addicted to like sex, you can be addicted to narcotics, alcohol, but also be addicted to power. You can be addicted to feeling a certain way. You can be addicted to any kind of thing that makes you feel less hopeless, less alone, less of a person. And the way to block it is to find something that you really want that creates your addiction. That's what you need. So this film kind of looks into that, but it does it through a much more humane situation because Burroughs was much more cartoonish writer in the sense that he was writing routines and strange metaphors for life and metaphors for addiction, metaphors for power, and how some people use power and use the addict and the failure of human beings to create their own better odds to succeed for what they want, even if what they want is not good for anyone else. And they've their own addiction to the power and what it creates and how it damages everyone else. So there's all these people who are either aware of their own addictions or not. And Burroughs is interpreting that, and he interprets it through sex, he interprets it through violence, he interprets it through metaphorical creatures, science fiction creatures. But science fiction is about the way we are, the way we don't want to see ourselves. And there's a lot of science fiction about the way we're going to develop and unseen influences on us that we aren't aware of. So when he got to cut-ups, he was actually cutting up. He was writing novels and he was cutting them up and moving them around so that it made less dramatic sense, but it was actually about what comes in between the what your logical mind would create. And if you've got meaning, but then you switch it around, you may actually find other things you weren't aware of. And so what's pushing you forward you're not aware of? And his idea of the word is actually the first sign of corruption. Is like what we want, how we force our emotions into words actually is part of the problem, in a sense, because we are trying to interpret something and we're only getting so much right, and there's a lot of raw in there things we can't deal with. So it's the thing is that how our brains are actually structured, and it's much more complicated than even simple words can actually explain. There's more in art and the way lives are run that actually tell you a lot more about the world rather than just what people say. So Burroughs was interested in art, he's interested in all sorts of things and how the metaphors of control were created and how they evolved in humans. So Cronenberg was really into this. He really loved all this. And a lot of the metaphors that Burroughs did was very body conscious, which influenced Cronenberg when he started to do his films, which were very body conscious, with things like Crimes of the Future, the original Crimes of the Future, Shivers, Rabid, this whole idea of the body being taken out of control and what damage does it cause to society. In Shivers, it's an isolated society, so the sense of rules and regulations change. In Rabid, it's an outbreak of rabid creatures which causes violence and society to collapse. So it's different metaphors. In The Brood, it's about family relations and how bodies and your own psychological problems can be metaphoric within your flesh, and what are those problems. So Cronenberg uses body consciousness, but not in a simplistic way. Now, one of the reasons I think he did not like the term body horror is because he used body movement as metaphors, but it's not always negative, not always fear. It's about the curiosity and the changes being made. It's not just about, oh my God, that's horrific. Some people may say, oh my God, that's horrific, but with Cronenberg films, it's much more ambiguous what it's meant to mean and what it's meant to be showing you. So when he got to June Burroughs, he'd already matured as a director. He'd already done things like Videodrome, The Fly, and Dead Zone and Dead Ringers, which were much more about psychological problems mixed with technology and mixed with how the characters dealt with life. So it wasn't just like black and white, really. It never really was with Cronenberg, but it became much more complicated, and then it would go further beyond Naked Lunch, became continually complicated in a way that annoyed some of his fans of original films because they were less schlocky and they were much more meditations on humanity and how you survive and the complications of survival and the complications of figuring out who you actually are and what you actually are, despite what you think you are. So a lot of the themes that came through Naked Lunch actually propelled into the second half of his career in lots of ways. Like, this is almost like the kind of breaking point of the early Cronenberg to the later Cronenberg. You know, so it was kind of the change film. Now, it's not as good. I don't think it's as good as Crash, which seems much clearer definition between the original work and the film. This one, I think, Cronenberg does have a fanboy element to him with Burroughs. He doesn't have it with Ballard, which does mean that sometimes I think for me, it could have been less respectful in some ways, but I mean a better film. But I still think it's a wonderful film. I just think there is a kind of element of if someone loves someone so much, sometimes there won't be a bad boy in the way that it needs to be done, which is the thing I think this film has a little bit of. Not much though, but just a little bit of. Now, Cronenberg knew he could not make an adaptation of Naked Lunch literally, because there would be way too much drug use. There'd be way too much violence. There would be too much homosexuality. Every country would have been going crazy with the film if they'd done that. And it would have been too cartoonish, because one thing you find in books is you internalize the imagery. And if you try and put it in film, the way they come out, the way the words come out, and the way the images created by the words come out in your head can be more nuanced and get a film which is much more literal. So Cronenberg understood that was something that you couldn't do. You had to find some other way. So his idea was to look at the metaphor of control and point of view and how it adapts and stress and how a person can adapt through life, but the different power fantasies and power and weaknesses within them can adapt a point of view. So it becomes about what's the play they're doing with themselves to get from A to B. So it becomes a more nuanced, humane film. Now, the big criticism of the film was it was not gay enough, because Burroughs was obviously gay, and the book was obviously gay, and the film is much more. There's all that stuff in there, but there's also emphasis on Burroughs' connection with his wife who dies, and his interest in dealing with the ramifications of her past, his past with her, and the complications of that as well, that kind of male-female relationship as well as the male-male relationships. So even though by the time we started writing Naked Lunch, Burroughs was much more obviously outwardly gay, because it's William Lee rather than William Burroughs writing this as a character, Cronenberg can actually make it more complicated about what this character's about, and actually can look at what he was like in his life, because Burroughs did have a time when he did go to therapy to try and deal with his homosexuality. It didn't last, and eventually he kind of came down on what he was. It just because of the time, it was much more complicated and difficult to become outwardly gay. But he had friends with the same situation, so eventually he managed to be very brave about the whole thing at a time that was very intolerant. So this kind of looks at that in subtle ways, but also it's just not all male film. There is a woman in the film, not many, but there are some. So it does look at a more nuanced view of Burroughs as a person rather than just a figure that's a cult figure. So we look at him almost as a T-shirt or a poster in a wall. It's much more complicated than that. And again, the film is looking at what it was like to be Burroughs, how out of control his addictions were. And they were out of control, and they were numerous, and it took him a long time, far beyond Naked Lunch writing, to actually get control of his addictions. It took a very long time. He was really trapped within his addictions, which the film also hints at, because it has to tell a story. There's only so far it can go. So it's a film where you don't know how much is imagined, how much is real, and ultimately it doesn't really matter, because it's what the characters' fantasies of what's going on in his head. He's taking all these drugs as he tries to work out everything that's been in his head for years is now finding expression because of the trauma of his wife's death and the amount of drugs he's taken. And he seems to have gone to a place called Interzone, this fantasy land that's based in Tangiers. And it's like him trying to discover a new land and where he fits in this new land. And the new land's almost a metaphor for the new him. And by the end of it, he's going to another place, which is also a next level of the new him, as he tries to slowly figure out who he is. And the film is about the kind of pain that goes through an artist trying to figure out who they are, to write these books. That it's not an easy process. It is a complicated process, but they don't always know what they're doing. They're going by instinct, and they're following the subconscious in ways that they don't understand. And one of the big things in the film is it's Burroughs as William Lee try to figure out why he killed his wife, because he can't quite figure it out. It's like he had frustrations with her, but she was obviously a big part of his life, and suddenly they do with everything, she gets shot, and it's something he can't quite figure out. So he has to find like conspiracy theories and strange creatures telling him he's a spy and things like that, as he tries to metaphorically put shields up and try and talk his way out of things that he wants to figure out about himself through these conversations. And he's also having to deal with these other characters who also have their various problems. So you're never quite sure what's real and what's not. And are these characters he meets real people or figments of his imagination, or the people with their own problems and own fantasies that he's interacting with that creates other situations, fantastical situations where they're all on drugs that he interprets as almost alien, something alien to him. Because there's a lot of things here about the kind of sense of paranoia and fear of dealing with others that are not you, and dealing with others who may have your worst interests at heart. And so there's the metaphor of the fear of anyone else but yourself, and there's also a fear of yourself in your own head. So it is a sense of someone who's completely out of control, trying to instinctively figure out a way through it. And for that, he's insisting on trying to control himself as a writer, even though he doesn't really have a plan of how to do that. And the film doesn't have a narrative that's very, very focused. It's actually episodic as he runs from one situation to the other, as he runs into these other different people. And he just slowly moves forward, growing from someone who's not a writer to someone who is. And it's all about how his style develops. Like, because he's so fragile in this film, his style becomes a much more like a observational, journalistic, Sam Fuller type of character who writes from a distance, but it's also got a lot of little emotions floating through the words as well. And it creates a kind of voice that he becomes comfortable putting out to the world, even if it's coming from a subconscious half the time. Because Burroughs even said he can't remember writing Naked Lunch a lot of the time because he was so high. And this is shown in the film as well. It's a sense of how he delivers a persona that's not actually him in real life, but it's a persona he can face off to the world. Just as well, he's a persona for William Burroughs. So it's a distance and a distance for this other character. There's a distance from Burroughs to William Lee, which is an invented character, who was the original name he had in certain books. And then there's a character, William Lee, to the persona he's creating. So there's distancing all the time as Burroughs tries to figure it out. And then when Lee's trying to figure it out in the film, an idea of what actually creates someone autistic through trauma, what actually is the process, because it's not a linear process of something horrible happened to me, I'm going to write about it, and that's it. This is much more like something horrible happened to him, and it unplugged all the repressed feelings of a society he had, even if he's not fully aware of them all, and he's willing to be a sucker at times to try and figure things out. He still kind of instinctively knows what they are. He's just floating through it, trying to keep his psyche in some sort of order, try to find some logic, even when he's lying to himself. And there's a lot of times in this film, he's obviously just lying to himself to try and ignore the reality of what's happening, because he doesn't want to face up to certain things within his character. And so it takes him a while. He has to. He's not comfortable with the fact that he's gay, and at the start, and they have this line: homosexuality is the best cover spy ever had. So he's trying to tell himself he's doing this for spy network and Interzone, even though it's really for himself. But it's his way of getting through a situation he's not really deal with. Writing these reports and saying that women and men are different species to each other is as we're dealing with men and women's differences, and whatever caused him to kill his wife, whatever fear or paranoia caused him to kill his wife. And he's trying to externalize it with these kind of science fiction, film noirish feelings as a distance. But every so often, emotions do come through, which is great because Peter Weller can do the flat, monotone sarcasm, but can also do the emotion that jumps through irrationally, out of control all the time. And as I stated earlier on, there was the cut-up technique. And this film used like a subtle version of it and its narrative in the sense of like what it's doing is it's creating this narrative that's also been cut up by his experiences of the rational world versus the irrational world, and they're bouncing off each other all the time. The rational world he can't explain and his rationality. It's almost like a cut up, an occurrence where he's actually experiencing something that feels violently different from what he's expecting because the logic of two linear paths have been moved around in different order that he's not quite comfortable with. Like him dealing with his dead wife when suddenly another woman comes in, also played with Judy Davis, who looks like his dead wife, basically, and it causes him to basically bring up all the things he's trying to suppress. But also, there's a cut-up of Ian Holm as her husband saying that he's quietly killing his wife, but not consciously because of talking telepathically. It's just like it jumps back and forward from something that's irrational to something that's irrational, almost like it's something he's almost cutting it up his own mind to try and work his way through it. But not done in a way that's like a obvious art house installation project. It's just like the narrative actually jumps in interesting, odd ways that do make sense, but they try to juxtapose things that he would never be comfortable with against each other, like a cut-up would, but doing that as a narrative form. So it does get from A to B for a film, but it also goes off in interesting, odd ways that will make you feel uncomfortable. Now, one of the things is this film should be seen on the big screen. Because in the small screen, there is a mood to it you don't get. In the small screen, it feels a lot more like a TV. It's not a TV movie. If you don't really get the atmosphere of the cinematography and the atmosphere of the omnipresent danger within his life as he goes through these dark dungeon places. In the TV, it kind of flattens out a little bit, so you don't get a sense of his paranoia going through this situation that he has no real control over because it's in his head, or it could be in his head, but he's not quite sure where it's going, what he's doing, why he's doing things. And you lose that in TV. It just becomes a series of these interesting things. It feels more conventional on the TV screen. Well, in the film, when you actually watch on a bigger screen, the strangeness comes through the atmosphere a lot more, and you get a sense of how disconnected he is and how it's almost like in the kind of normal scene that it's like William Lee's trying to pull himself back to things he knows, experience he knows, experiences he understands, and then a bug appears and gives him these weird orders. And it just shakes him out of his path. And whenever he tries to get used to the bug rump and try and follow those orders and learn about himself a bit more there, someone else shakes him out the path. And you don't get that sense on the TV screen, but you see this projector, you feel much more like he's always shaking out whatever path he is and whatever new reality he can find. Next scene, someone's going to shake him out of that because his mind is acting against itself all the time because he's trying to shake his way out of all of these sensations that will try to lie to him. And when he's up subconscious and writing this book, he's writing Naked Lunch, which is a far more brutal thing than he can experience in his life because you can't be as extreme as Naked Lunch in your life. You have to be something more nuanced with human emotions. And this book is much more satirical and pornographic and weird and different. And it's like you can't really live with that day to day. You have to actually try and find a way through that in some way. So this film shows that human side of him, but also shows you his brain his mind is just always trying to shake him out of any ease he's got because he's still trying to lie to himself about a lot of his interests, his ambitions, his needs, and it's almost a subconscious saying, no, I'm not letting you do that. And all of these projections, these fantasies that he talks about of these mugwumps and all these kind of creatures that are manipulating life are kind of metaphors for the things he sees in society that are manipulating things like right-wing politicians or left-wing politicians, like communism and capitalism, both seen as kind of dangerous, because by the end he's going to a communist area to spy, and before he was in Interzone, which was basically a very capitalist situation where all these writers, these arty writers, are exploiting the system because they have money. So it's like him going through different types of social areas and seeing how they work, and observing them and interacting with them and writing reports on them. His reports are far more brutal than he can actually deal with because of the book Making Lunch, rather than what he's comfortable dealing with, which is so much more fragmentary. So it's a very complicated film because you're dealing with a point of view character who is not only an unreliable narrator, and it says even though he's not narrating the story, you get everything from his point of view, so he's very unreliable that way. But he's unreliable to himself. Even he can't face up to what he's worried about. So you get it from a point of view of someone who you can't quite trust of what he's seen as what's actually happening. And it's also like, what does it matter what's actually happening? What he's seen is actually telling him something of himself, how he sees the world. Like he sees it in a paranoid way. He sees it in a way that people aren't human, people are alien, people are out to get each other in nasty ways. There's all the writers who should be his friends are actually just as jealous as him as he is of them, and it's almost a war between them, and it just shows humanity in a dark way, a way of use each other. Like even like Lee uses Kiki, which is this Tangerine rent boy, that he uses him to get information, and Benway, who's Paperboy Scheider, and everyone uses each other, everyone sells each other out, because everyone's got one point of view that evolves over time. And the film just looks at the kind of emotional toll of that, where we're selling someone out intentionally or unintentionally. We are a kind of breed that's untrustworthy, and how do you deal with that? If you know it's in you, it's in everyone else, how do you deal with that? And his way of doing it is to try and be as objective as possible and write reports and fantasize it around the reports and have all these crazy things happening that are metaphors for what you experience in life, but you might be very uncomfortable with those metaphors because he's not trying to be polite. Well, in the real life of the film, he's trying to be polite within really difficult circumstances. So there's a lot going on, and you always have to work out how real or how fantasy am I. And the good thing with Naked Lunch is you can watch it from different angles as you rewatch it, because you can take a more rational approach sometimes, you can take a more fantastical approach the next time, and there's different ways you can interpret the end. So there's a lot you can do with this film, and a lot of ways to experience it. But it's a very emotional film. It's very tragic to look at writers and how lonely a lot of them are and how damaged they are. And also the idea of you can't really get over the things you do. You can avoid them as much as you can, but if you do something horrible, that sticks with you. You're trapped in the past in some way. So Naked Lunch is wonderful. It's a wonderful film. You should go see it. It's now available with a new remaster, so there's no excuse not to see it. It is just terrific. So I hope this video inspires people to actually watch it, because it's one of Cronenberg's most underrated films. I don't think it's one of his best films, but it's definitely underrated because it's some wonderful stuff in it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back soon with another one, but that's me for now. Right, bye.